Now, the Queen celebrates her official birthday today with the traditional Trooping the Colour parade.
That's right, and in a statement released this morning, she says it's difficult to escape a very sombre mood following the recent tragedies in London and Manchester. We're here in the studio with Isabel and myself is royal commentator Ian Pelham Turner. Ian, thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
I don't even know where to start with you. First of all, your reaction to this statement. I thought it was so interesting that there's hardly, if any, mention of her birthday at all. It's just a one line saying usually this would be a time to celebrate. However, I'm going to talk about these recent tragedies.
I was just saying to my royal colleague Helena Sharp before I came on, I think this is the most historic missive from the Queen in many, many years. I was watching you when you first did it as breaking news earlier this morning. It reminded me straight away of Princess Elizabeth with her Princess Margaret when they did their first radio broadcast in the 1940s during the war to actually tell children of the world how they felt and how they empathised with the whole situation. That's exactly what that message has done this morning. It is so important, I feel, these days for the communities to understand that there is people out there. I mean, I know, I run a project called Good News Britain, and I know how important the royal family is to the communities in Britain. They really respect them. And when they see something like that, the value of that, I think, is enormous.
See, it's interesting you talking about the Second World War, because I'm just trying to look back at when the Queen has come out in the way she has come out during this season, and I couldn't think of anything. I guess the war.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, because I think the reality was something like this. I was shocked, if I'm honest. I was shocked to hear that statement this morning. I think it's such a powerful statement. You know, the reality right now is, you'll probably understand, is that all the diversity communities need to come together. They need to feel respected, they need to feel like first-class citizens, and what the Queen has done this morning has, I feel, created that exactly the right feeling.
I mean, you were booked to come in, weren't you, before the statement was released this morning? And when I was looking through the guest list, I was thinking, gosh, how is the Queen, having come from, Grenfell Tower yesterday and meeting survivors and hearing wailing children, grieving, going to be then going down the Mall in a carriage with all the pageantry, and this statement picked up on that mood very astutely, didn't it?
It did, because, I look at all these things. I mean, I work with my colleague William Cooper, who actually first started off Good News, and he has been working on all the tragedies in the past few months. He has seen at first hand, and it almost honours him as well as an individual that the Queen recognises what is going on at the moment. And I think, as she said today, yes, I mean, there is a lot of hope out there. But that's the thing I think we have to emphasise as well. There is so much hope out there at the same time of what can happen. And I think right now, people like the royal family, especially William, all of them are now doing their level best to actually talk to the communities and say, there is a future.
And the reaction's been amazing, really, throughout. Yeah, I can't remember a time where I've seen the royal family so popular amongst people.
No, I mean, to actually see what's happening right now, I think is historic. I think that is going to be one of the most historic messages that will come out, from the royal family for a long, long time.
And let's not forget, Prince William himself, a Kensington resident, just down the road. There's been all this kind of veiled criticism of rich people in the borough, because we've been talking about the inequalities surrounding this tragedy. And yet they managed to tread that path, don't they? They're obviously super privileged, incredibly wealthy, and yet very in touch with ordinary people.
Well, obviously, because, I mean, he's air ambulance. I mean, that's his training. He will understand. He will have seen at first hand similar tragedies that what's happened. I was watching, I think Sky News, I take my hat off to Sky News, because I think the reality is you've actually brought the empathy of all the communities right now, and I think you're probably the best channel for actually doing that at the same time. It's so important to actually show what the communities are feeling.
And talking of diversity, then, what are your thoughts on the honours list itself? A lot of diversity and a lot of honouring those who have been involved in these tragedies in any way, shape or form.
It's a start. I don't think 10% is nearly enough, if I'm honest. And it was from what I understand, it was only done because it's the centenary of the OBE and the MBE, and so they thought 10% of the... I recognise every single day what diversity communities bring to Britain, and I think they should be much more highlighted than they are today. You know, and we try to do it through our TV programme on Good News Britain, but at the same time, there are so many people there who really should be honoured a lot more than they are.
And just lastly, it is Trooping the Colour today. That will go ahead.
Yes.
You know, say what you like, the Queen will always stick to her plans.
Absolutely.
What can we expect from today? All the traditional pageantry, which colours will be chosen?
I think, well, I mean, colour-wise, that's going to be, that's her own statement. I think the only bit of gossip to look for today is whether Harry's girlfriend
Chelsea. Oh, no, not Chelsea. That's the old one. Goodness me. Someone help me.
Meghan Markle.
The problem is at the moment is that two of his former girlfriends as well are on Love Island, so that's causing him embarrassment.
Now you're losing me.
You've been watching in your free time, Love Island. Interesting.
Well, I pick these things up.
Yeah, sure you picked it up in the press. You've been watching. So it should be quite interesting because you've always got a little bit of gossip for us.
I always know the gossip. So the point, I predicted 4 or 5 weeks ago on Sky that I think they're already engaged. I think the Queen...
No, come on. Why do you think that?
You know what, he got it right when on the actual Pippa's wedding day, in terms of how it all went, in terms of Meghan not turning up for the actual wedding, going to the reception,
that's a bit spooky.
Back.
Well,
but anyway, yes, you
heard it here first then, apparently.
You never know, it might not be, but yes, that's a prediction from Ian after watching Love Island.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Plenty more still to come here on Sunrise, the most diverse Queen's birthday honours list ever.
Available to buy and keep in Sky Store.
Let's get more now on today's big society wedding as Pippa Middleton marries her financier fiancé. Oh, nice bit of alliteration this morning.
Lovely.
James Matthews, royal photographer and commentator Ian Pelham Turner joins us.
Good morning. It's one of these wonderfully juicy, royal, gossipy days.
And the main question is she going to turn up and is she engaged? If she turns up, does it show that she's engaged?
Well, now you're asking me. Allegedly, I think they're already engaged.
We're talking about Meghan Markle and Harry. We know that Pippa and James Matthews are
later. But yeah, Meghan,
I think
that's what the papers are mostly focusing on.
Yes, I don't think you will see them that much today, if I'm honest, because I don't think it'll be royal protocol today. I think Camilla will marshal both Kate and Meghan as well to actually protect them. It's going to be raining just after they come out, so umbrellas can actually hide or reveal as much as the royal family wish to at the same time.
So you think potentially they could already be engaged? Would the Queen know about this? What's the protocol for something like this?
The Queen would have to know about it. Harry is 5th in line, so up to 6th in line, the Queen has to give consent for this at the same time. So I think my best guess is if you see Harry and Meghan both on the balcony on the Queen's birthday next month, that's the first official sign, and I think they will make it official just before Invictus in Canada in September.
I'm always intrigued as to who makes those decisions, like those PR decisions, and how much do the people inside that circle, for example, something like appearing on the balcony, how much do the people inside the circle know that people like you are looking for that as a sign? Oh,
absolutely. I mean, you know, I work with my colleague Helen Ashard, another royal photographer, and we're constantly looking for these types of signs. You know, it's sort of something where, I mean, it's even been said at the moment that they're not going to be married in Westminster Abbey, they're going to be married in St Paul's, and that's going to be early next year.
How much controversy could there be in the potential engagement, given she's of mixed heritage? Would you have ever seen something like this 10, 20 years ago?
You wouldn't, because basically she's a divorcee. She's partly Jewish in her faith as well. And so these types of sort of options would have been much, much harder. Nowadays, it's much more lax. I think the reality is they just want to get Harry married. You know, they need more royal children. And my biggest prediction, I think we will have 3 royal children, new royal children in 2019.
Wow, there you go. Place your bets.
I guess we better talk about a certain wedding.
Yes, we must talk about the bride and groom today.
Well, I can tell you, first of all, as we are talking right now, Pippa is tucking into her egg white omelette and smoothies.
Egg white omelette?
That's what she's having for her breakfast right now. And she has been toning up. So she's very, very toned now. She's been going to this very special gymnasium in central London where the smoothies that she's drinking are £100 a glass.
Ian, I wish we had time to ask how you know all those things, but we'll leave it to mystery. Thank you so much for coming in and speaking to us, and we'll look forward to seeing all those famous faces arrive at the wedding later on this morning.
Now, Sky News has learned that the Met Police could step up the use of...
Darren, thank you.
Now, it's been a week of carefully staged pictures that have not only told political stories, but have also become the story. To discuss some of the week's key images, we're joined now by Tom Peck, parliamentary sketch writer at The Independent, and Ian Pelham Turner, a photographer who previously worked behind the scenes as a photography advisor at Number 10 during John Major's government. Welcome to you both. I always think of you as a royal photographer, but
I know, but I talk about anything these days. 50 years of journalism, that teaches you one thing.
So what is the perfect political photograph, and what message are they trying to convey?
I mean, at the moment, with the Scottish photographs, really, her image is all about, I'm in control, I'm petite, but I'm happy, you know, I will talk to the world, I will kick my shoes off, and I will sort of be seen as the person who they can come and talk to. Theresa May, on the other hand, is very robotic, you know, stood behind this huge desk. It looks like sort of something off stargazing, you know, one of the sci-fi movies. And it's a very robotic, very stiff photograph. And I think Theresa May has to really learn how to communicate in photographs as well.
Tom, would you agree? What message did they put across to you, those two different letter-writing stances?
Well, the message they intend to put across is the message that's been described. But in my opinion, the message that they do put across is the same, which is that these people are both quite weird in the sense that, which is shared with a lot of politicians, in that these pictures mainly, first and foremost, go up on their Twitter feeds. And if you look at the Twitter feed of a normal person, what you find is pictures of funny cafe signs that they've seen or something that their kids are doing. And if you look at a politician's Twitter feed, usually they don't really know how to use it, especially Theresa May. And what you see is a list of photographs of themselves taken by professionals. And I think all they really convey to a real person is that they're completely bogus.
Well, it's very much created, isn't it, Ian? Very much a created scene that we're seeing there. But it's nothing new. If we look back to a very similar picture with Margaret Thatcher, she was doing this a long time ago.
Absolutely, but Margaret Thatcher, I mean, you know, I look at the difference between the socialists and the Conservatives. And on the whole, the socialists tend to be much more photographic savvy than the Conservatives did. There's only really 2 or 3 Conservatives that I've ever worked with, which is Margaret Thatcher, Heseltine, and obviously Boris Johnson now, who have got that sense of creating the right type of branding that they want to portray from their message at the same time. And that's, you know, for them, they bring out that power picture. And that's what everyone is looking for. And these dull pictures of Theresa May sort of sat behind a desk signing something, it means nothing. It doesn't convey anything. And when I even looked at the Annie Leibovitz pictures recently that she had taken as well, she looks very stiff. She looks scared of the camera. And you can't be when you're Prime Minister.
Tom, do you think that the Margaret Thatcher shot that we just showed of her on the couch with her knees up on the couch, did that convey a different message to the Nicola Sturgeon photo that we saw, which is almost identical pose? And what's the difference?
They're very similar. I confess I'd never seen that Margaret Thatcher picture before today. But the point, really, you can compare the 2 pictures, but what you can't compare are the 2 eras. Margaret Thatcher has a picture taken of her signing some cabinet papers in 10 Downing Street, which is released to picture desks of newspapers, then they run it, possibly with a story, possibly not. Now, photographs do something completely different. They exist in a social media world, and they need to be much more user-friendly. I mean, I thought actually do you remember the royal family pictures a little while ago that they released, and that actually Kate Middleton had just taken them herself?
Yeah.
And I think in 2017 that's what politicians should be doing.
I suppose we have to talk about Legxit, don't we? That picture that caused a lot of debate.
Well,
what did you make of that as a photographer?
Well,
and did the photographer know what would happen?
No.
Are you sure?
I'm quite sure. I think I was just discussing it before I came on with Helen Sharp, my other royal photographer colleague. You know, very much, I'm a feminist, first of all, very much support feminism at the same time. And when I see things like that, that's ridiculous. My old newspaper used to be the Daily Mail, you know, so I know the type of cynical look they can put on a project at times. And so I think, you know, with Legxit, that was a very silly thing to do, because...
On whose part?
On the part, I think, of the newspaper, because we are going through a serious time at the same time. Yes, I think there will be elements of fun in the future. I mean, I can see before too long Boris in a tank on the tops of White Cliffs of Dover, you know, talking about how he's going to preserve, you know, the defence systems for Europe. But right now, that was quite a serious one. And so you've got to, you know, it's horses for courses, I think. And at times, putting out a message like that, I think was demeaning to women, and it's demeaning to the role that they play as well.
Tom, do you agree with that?
To an extent, yes. I mean, where I sit in Westminster in my office, I share a room with lots of other newspapers, lots of other media groups, and far from it be for me to name who it was who was on the phone to their picture desk being told you need to the same picture, you know, you need to recrop this picture to show a bit more leg, and him slamming his phone down saying, God, they're a bunch of sexists. But I feel slightly sorry for the Daily Mail in that it's a process, because the pictures come in, a story is commissioned to go with the pictures, somebody else decides that's the best story of the day, so they put it on the front, and somebody else writes the caption, which was what sunk it really and caused the outrage. And suddenly they're victims of a braying mob, if you like. But, of course, everybody talks about Theresa May's clothes, don't they? But she chooses to wear very interesting clothes. She could dress like Angela... No one talks about Angela Merkel's clothes or Hillary Clinton's clothes.
Well, that's
and these
her
people
choice,
are...
though.
And these people are...
What she wears is her choice.
Yeah, of course. And she enjoys... Theresa May loves clothes, and that's good. And you do have to treat these people like human beings.
Because they are.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Let's have a look at, we were talking about letters, let's have a look at the letter that was handed over by Sir Tim Barrow. I mean, what can we read into this photo? Ian, take us into this picture.
I think, you know, this is your typical Conservative picture. You know, it's safe, it's to the point, and doesn't say anything. And when I used to work with a lot of Conservative politicians at the Conservative cabinet, and I used to watch them, and they would go on places like this, and then they would come back to me afterwards smiling, saying, I did a great deal, but I didn't say anything. And that's what that picture says.
But I mean, it is quite a serious point, though, isn't it? That this letter really changes our whole fortunes from that day on.
It's a serious point, and I quite agree. But, you know, I remember sort of photographs going back to Peace in Our Time. Not that I took them, by the way, but, you know, where there was a much more sort of symbolic, much more dynamic picture. This is just your standard picture shots that, you know, that the Daily Telegraph will use, the Daily Mail will use, you know, and it's sort of something that sort of just stands the moment of time.
Tom, do you agree on that? Does it basically bog standard shot, didn't really say anything, didn't tell us any more than what we can see?
Yeah, I found that Sir Tim Barrow stuff on Wednesday morning quite interesting. I mean, before I covered politics, I used to cover sport. And if you go to a World Cup or to an Olympics or something, you see the efforts of the cameramen and the photographers to try and convey the sheer scale of these events, which, of course, they do a very good job, but they can never quite do it. And in politics, it always strikes me as being the other way around, because these are events of immense seriousness, of immense magnitude, but they are also extremely mundane. I mean, Tim Barrow on Wednesday morning with a middle-aged civil servant turning up to an office with a briefcase. I don't quite, and it's the gravity of the situation that makes it serious. I don't quite know how a photographer is meant to convey the historic moment of a letter being put in the hand of another middle-aged bloke. It's very difficult.
Let's take a look at another middle-aged bloke, but an American one. He's the President of the United States of America,
Yes.
Donald Trump. He does tend to invite the cameras in when he has anything
Yes.
to sign, doesn't he?
I love him. I have to
Why?
be
Why
honest.
do you love him?
Because he is probably one of the best people to photograph. He's going to do anything. You know, there used to be a thing called the bounce when I worked with politicians, and the bounce is they came into the room, and before they could think about it, you would actually pick them up, talk to them, and push them into situations they didn't want to do, a la Donald Trump. You know, I mean, in the future now, you know, he's showboating constantly. I was talking to one of the American embassies the other day, one of the ambassadors. Every morning they wake up now frightened because they don't know what the next text is going to be. So it's an interesting thing. I love him.
Tom, do you think he's going to bring a lot more colour into the traditional photo of the signing of declarations, the handing over of letters, etc.?
Well, Obama was pretty good news for photographers. He was incredibly photogenic, incredibly charismatic chap. Personally, Donald Trump, bad news for the world, but very, very good news for satirists, without any shadow of a doubt.
Tom Peck and Ian Pelham Turner, thank you very much for sharing your views on this week that's been full of letters flying forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, we join officers on the front line.
His royal duties after footage emerged of him partying during a skiing trip. Well, our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills is live in Paris this morning. Is it likely to overshadow their trip then, do you think?
Well, this is going to be the first time that we're going to see Prince William and Kate out and about doing their public duties since those videos have been released of Prince William partying in Verbier. If you haven't seen those videos, I hope that we can show you one of them now. It goes without saying that he has been criticised for his dance moves. Some people saying there's a bit of dad dancing going on. But more significantly, others have said that really this is, again, a display that Prince William is not taking his royal duties seriously enough. The main reason for that is not simply because he was over there on holiday, but because on Monday he missed the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey, which the Queen sees as a very important part of the annual calendar. But on the other hand, you've also got people who are saying, do you know what? He's going to face a whole life of royal duties. At the moment, you have three generations of the royal family who can carry out those responsibilities. So frankly, he should be left alone to enjoy himself a little bit. Over the next couple of days, it's going to be a very busy time for Prince William and Kate. No chance to escape away from the cameras. This morning, we're going to see them in Hounslow giving shamrocks to the Irish Guards. They'll then hot-foot it over here to Paris, where they'll meet up with President Hollande. There's also a reception that will go on at the embassy this afternoon called Les Voisins, which is in English cousins, and that really goes to highlight how important this is as a diplomatic mission for them in terms of Brexit and the UK relationships here in Europe. So certainly Prince William would not want those videos to overshadow what is an important part of royal business today.
OK, Rhiannon, thanks very much. And that is the subject of our debate at 9:30 this morning, with Prince William being accused of work shy. We're asking, is it OK for the Prince to party? Your views, as always, very welcome.
Yeah, do you know what? Someone's just tweeted saying this stiff upper lip business is history.
Yeah, maybe.
And we should just let them be a bit more modern. Anyway, we'll talk that through, as Isabel said, at 9:30. Here's a rock that Jenny from the block would have liked. A pastor working in the mines of eastern Sierra Leone has unearthed a diamond, 706 carats. Could be one of the largest ever found. The pastor who made the discovery will, thankfully for him, get to keep 96% of the profits. It's going to go for millions upon millions upon millions of pounds.
You'll be one of those bidding.
Oh, I wish. I love a bit of sparkle.
Now, all morning we've been dancing along, quite literally, with Prince William in Verbier, but putting aside the quality of his dad dancing, is it OK for the heir to the throne to be partying his head off?
Well, with us to discuss this, royal commentator and former royal photographer Ian Pelham Turner, and author and social commentator Liz Fraser. Good to see you both. A lot of people have been tweeting this morning saying, you know, he's just letting his hair down. What's wrong with that?
I think the reality at the moment is there may be another reason behind it as well. I looked at who went on with him, you know, on this trip, and Tom van Strombenzi is a great friend of his. But it's a year to the day since his divorce.
Right.
And I wonder whether or not this is a trip to actually sort of help him get over the first year of the divorce at the same time. You've got to remember that William and Tom are very, very strong friends from the past as well. So this could be a reason why he's taken this trip.
Whatever the reason, does that matter? I mean, is it appropriate to see the heir to the throne, you know, as we see doing the traditional dance when he's raising the roof? He's a father. He was missing the Commonwealth celebrations.
I think that the reality, again, is with this sort of type of thing, Helena Sharp, my business partner, was saying he was doing like a granddad dance, you know.
That's even more damning than dad dance.
I know. It's sort of damning to say the least. It may be that this was the only time available to him. The problem is a lot of time, you know, they say he's work shy, but the real issue is, I think a lot of the time, is that only his recorded public events go down as his days working, apart from the helicopter.
Well, look, Liz, he is the heir to the throne. He is going to be the king of, you know, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and the Commonwealth, and all the rest of it. He's got some serious responsibilities to live up to. This isn't how we want to see our future king, is it?
And actually, we shouldn't be seeing that because he was on his own, having a good time with his friends, maybe perhaps supporting a friend of his, and he's also a human being, apart from anything else. The only reason we saw that is because somebody videoed it on a phone and put it out there, and this big hoo-ha has happened. I think the bottom line is that, you know, the world has changed a little bit, and we are much more able to recognise the fact that a statesman, a modern ambassador of any, whether it's a country, a company, or a family, or anything, is also allowed to have their own life, and actually maybe it's good for him. I'm going to tell you a story now that I've never spoken about in public, but I do think it's relevant, very, very relevant to this. When I was 14, back in the late 80s, I was in the Highlands of Scotland, where my family comes from, and I was in a swimming pool, and a beautiful young girl came in and started swimming very well. And she came and sat next to me in a little bubble pool, and she had mascara all down her face, and she was chatting away, and it was Princess Diana. And I was 14. She was the most famous woman in the world at the time, I would say, arguably. And she came and sat down next to me. There was nobody else in the pool. It's a very remote place of the world. And she was chatting with me about chlorine in the pool, and we had this lovely natter. And what I got from that, apart from thinking, oh my God, it's Princess Diana talking to me in a pool, she just wanted to be normal. She just wanted to be able to have a normal connection. And we know about her mental health issues after that. I had bulimia for 15 years, just after I met her, actually, not connected, obviously. But I really am incredibly sensitive and incredibly aware of the importance for humans to be who you are, as well as having your public life. And, you know, that whole crushing of what was required in her life was so well documented as being incredibly bad for her. William, as her son, will be more aware of that than anybody. He will want not only for himself, but this beautiful protection that he has over Kate, which is so visible, and for his children, to want to make sure that he balances that. And I think that we, as a country, as a society, actually really owe it to him in a way, to allow him to have that, you know, what perhaps his mother didn't have, to be the person that he is. And he is a great statesman, I think, for modern Europe, for young Europe. And I think he dances very well, actually. I think he has rhythm.
I quite like
I think he's dancing well.
Ian, I mean, is there a fair point in all of that? I mean, we've had overwhelming support, haven't we, on Twitter this morning, Stephen? I mean, I'd say 99% of the tweets, but I'll just read this one out from Susan Harris. She said, royals acting like normal folk, they should get up in the morning and earn their money like normal folk. And is there a point there that if he wants to be treated normally, then he should, you know, he's got a bit of a silver spoon lifestyle, hasn't he?
Not really. They live in a goldfish bowl. That's the problem. I mean, the pressure upon them is total. It's constant. And I think the reality as well is that with William especially, he is very, very strong with his friends. I think, you know, I think there is a lot more to this skiing trip than there was just purely a ladette's night out type of thing. I think there's a lot more to this, you know, to actually support a friend who's just gone through troubled times. And that is typical William.
Exactly. He seems like a really well-balanced young man. I mean, I imagine they're at home just laughing this off and whatever, you know, so of course that would happen. But it's really important that we do allow them, I think, to evolve a little bit. This isn't the 19th century. We do understand that you're allowed to have a life, and it is good for you.
But there is this claim that he missed this Commonwealth event. Now, someone tweeted this morning, I can't remember, it was way down my timeline now, but saying he won't have missed anything because if he's not there, then the Queen would have had to have given permission for him not to be there. Now, I don't know how royal protocol works with that sort of thing. But there was an event, he was scheduled to be there, he didn't make it.
I would have imagined, certainly, that he would have asked the Queen, first of all. He wouldn't, you know, he knows royal protocol inside out. And that's what makes me think that there was a more special personal reason for the Queen to give him this dispensation to go away with his friends. And I suspect the reason is as I stated, that...
But you have concerns, don't you, Ian, about image? And the image that he has to project internationally?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the big problem at the moment is what I call the golden triangle. You know, William, Harry and Kate are being processed into this sort of tangible, focused, almost like Hollywood stars in order to actually sort of create the attention for Britain. And they are brand Britain. There's no two ways about it. I think that that's the problem, is that they're actually trying to, and their people around them are trying to control their brand, their image. Because I suppose I liken it to almost a Hollywood star. You will see a Hollywood star when he's got or she's got a film to promote. Then there's value. If they're seen all the time, the problem is then, across the world, they lose that intrinsic visual value as well. And I think they have to be careful.
Or maybe we're just in a time where actually your brand and your image is much more than only your professional, you know, that in fact it adds value to them to be seen as people, to be young, functioning people in a normal way with friends and family, and when, you know, when it's they are on call all the time. They are on duty all the time. I think it's fantastic to see. We've had a tiny little glimpse. I'd rather not have seen it, because I'd rather he could have a really private life. But to be able to see that these people, you know, of course he can go out dancing, and we all look a bit stupid sometimes.
Deborah just tweeted 20 seconds ago, the person who's forwarded this video of him should be arrested, leave him alone. Well, the person will not have done anything illegal, but as you say, it's an insight which we shouldn't have had.
Yep. And you know, you see people coming through doors with the flashing lights, and, you know, I will go back to Diana again. You know, she was head down, onto her hat, under her hair. The pressure of that was absolutely unbearable. He was born into this role. He didn't choose this role. And we as a society actually do, I think we do have a responsibility to look after people like that and make sure we treat them well. I run a mental health website called Headcase, and I'm very, very fascinated by the pressure that young people are under with social media and all of this. They can't get away from it. He does a lot of work, both of them. Of course, we know that they represent mental health, you know, campaigns and stuff very openly and publicly. There's a very good reason, I suspect, why he particularly does. I think it's wonderful. And I think, far from devaluing brand Britain and the royal family, I think it adds a huge extra side to them. And for young people in our country, I think that's great. I
think my timeline and Stephen's timeline would agree with you on that one as well. Thank you both very much indeed. Really interesting to get your perspectives, and indeed anyone that's got in touch with us this morning on this debate. We always appreciate your take on these things.
We do indeed. Stay with us here on Sky News. Still to come, we're looking at the man who is free after 32 years behind bars, cleared of a murder that he always said he never committed.
Anti-monarchy campaigners are launching a crowdfunding campaign to try to get greater access to the Royal Archives.
Well, the group wants to know if legal loopholes could help open up what they describe as one of the most secretive institutions in the world. Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills reports.
Very nice to see you. Yeah, thank you.
The Queen's had access to a host of world leaders, read top-secret papers and been briefed on the most sensitive political issues. What's been said or written down is locked in the Royal Archives, away from the public eye. Graham Smith from the group Republic says it's time the royals opened up. So they're launching a crowdfunding campaign to lobby MPs, launch investigations and potentially take it to court.
And the British people, I think, have a right to know their past. They have a right to be able to properly judge this institution and the people that serve in it. And you can only really do that with full access to all the official records.
The archives are kept in the Round Tower at Windsor Castle and include personal and official documents of kings and queens from the past 250 years. Campaigners would rather that any royal letters, diaries or documents were treated like any other political papers that come from the Palace of Westminster. So handed over to the National Archives at Kew, the papers are then released after 30 years, and it's down to the archivist to decide what's really private and personal. Documents like King George III's private letters and Queen Victoria's journals have been made public, but the archives are exempt from freedom of information requests. Researchers and academics can apply for more access. Ben McIntyre has written books on spies and the SAS and thinks the royal family takes secrecy to a new level.
One of the ironies is that, in fact, MI5, our security service, is considerably more accessible historically than the royal family. Every year, MI5 releases archives that do not have a security implication, that do not embarrass living individuals, that do not invade privacy. Well, it seems to me that those are the principles that you could very easily apply to the Royal Archive and say everything else has to be released.
The Royal Post is sometimes still delivered by horse and carriage. Privacy is another tradition some believe is worth protecting.
It's much better that these papers should be kept for eventual use, and if it was subjected to rules whereby things had to be opened, quite frankly, they wouldn't be put into the Royal Archives and they'd probably disappear, because nobody in public life likes to write even an email these days, because it can be subject to the Freedom of Information Act and accessible.
It's rare for us to hear what the Queen really thinks.
Gold commander when the Chinese state visited.
Oh,
and
bad luck.
Those campaigning to get the archives opened up insist that we have a right to know. But while the papers remain in the hands of the royal family, it's up to them what we get to see. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News.
Well, Ian Pelham Turner is royal commentator and former royal photographer, and he's here with us now. I suppose the question is, Ian, does privacy equal the same as inaccessibility?
I wonder what they're talking about, first of all, royal secrets, because I wonder what I've missed over the past 50 years working with 5 generations of the royal family. I think the reality at the moment is I can see the argument as a journalist that there should be a certain amount of freedom of expression and really transparency. So I agree with that. But I work for Good News Britain, which is an organisation that promotes the royal family right across the world. And so I'm very much a royalist at the same time. And I think there is a very much red line path you've got to tread on sort of situations like this. It's all very well people who in reality are Republicans talking about this. But the reality is that if the royal family were dissolved in some way, what would happen? You know, things like tourism would suffer, things like after Brexit. The royal family is involved in all sorts of issues.
There are people who say, look, that may all be true, but the state funds the royal family. They are an instrument of state, and therefore all the rules that govern accessibility and transparency and record keeping and accountability ought to be the same as the state. I suppose the problem comes, you know, Rhiannon in her piece there was talking about what public records queue, you get the 30-year rule. So the Prime Minister says something and thinks, well, I don't want this to be out, but 30 years hence it comes out, we talk about it. Now that's fine if you're an elected politician. If you're the Queen, you know, you've done more than, your reign has lasted twice as long as a 30-year rule.
Absolutely
so
right.
You know, your reign is so long, it becomes a problem.
Absolutely right. Because if you sort of think about it, so I was talking to my colleague Helen Ashard about it just before I came on, the way the royal sort of future will happen is that if the Queen lasts as long as the Queen Mother, that's another, 10 or 11 years at least, hopefully. When Charles becomes king, you know, it will follow on through that even on this 30-year rule, you know, halfway through his reign, will the 30-year rule come out as well. As I say, I think, you know, the reality these days is that there has to be a certain amount of transparency, and I agree with that. You know, I mean, I had situations in the past. One example, years ago, I was shown the telegrams from Hitler to Edward VIII. This was years before it ever became really well known that, you know, that there was this sort of agreement between Hitler and Edward VIII. And at the time, could I get this story used anywhere? No. And even the negatives I took of both the gentleman who introduced it to me and the actual telegrams themselves, they disappeared. So these things happen. But I think nowadays, you know, if you look at it a few years on, the reality then was the story did come out. These days, if I'm honest with you, I think in reality Buckingham Palace leaks like a sieve most of the time. There are so many sort of stories coming out about it. You've only got to read your daily newspaper. I mean, I was listening to Ben McIntyre and his suggestions, and I quite agree. You know, there are certain red lines that have to be followed. Because obviously things like politically sensitive, security sensitive, and embarrassing sort of sections. But in reality, that's exactly what the Republicans are looking for.
When we have seen revelations in the royal family, because there was the Prince Charles spider letters that were finally published in the papers, I mean, were they really that revelatory? Were they really that damaging?
Precisely. You know, and the reality is that Charles stays up half the night. Do you know? I mean, he will come back 10 or 11 o'clock at night. That's when he starts writing his letters as well. So he is very, very focused on trying to sort of move Britain forward as well, you know, in the type of world that he wants to see. He's very ecologically friendly, and that's what he's really looking for.
There's a compromise here, Ian, isn't there?
Yes.
You know, I mean, we can understand why, if you're at the palace, the idea of that weekly meeting between the Prime Minister and the monarch should be a private matter for now. But imagine you say, OK, let's have a rule where when the monarch dies, that's the moment when they become an historical figure and we should have a look.
I mean, depending, of course, upon, you know, what is the situation then. You know, the way I look at things at the moment, the monarchy are going to become very, very important post-Brexit. You know, they can actually bring in the Commonwealth where other people can't. You know, that's a very heavy piece of business for the future. And so we've got to be very, very careful on how, you know, this is treated.
Ian, thanks very much. Thank you.
We're going to take to our Central London studio. Our city editor, Mike Kleiman's got some breaking news.